In Idaho v. Kohberger, almost everything turns on a single story. The state wants you to believe about DNA on a knife sheath. We're told that this DNA matches Bryan Kohberger and that it's 5.37 times 10 to the 27th power times more likely to be his than a random stranger's. That's a mind-bending number. But here's the problem. The path from the sheath to that statistic is hidden behind redactions, missing data, and shifting labels. Let's walk through what's actually in the paperwork. In STR work, a match is not a feeling. It's not a headline number. A match is a pattern. Specific alleles at specific loci with specific peak heights and electropherograms, compared between an evidence profile and a reference profile. Different accredited labs can look at the same borderline data and legitimately disagree. One might call it supportive. Another might call it inconclusive. So when you hear the sheath DNA matches Bryan Kohberger, that should mean here are the alleles, here are the peaks, here are the thresholds, here is the comparison. Instead, in the Idaho materials, the actual STR tables and electropherograms are blacked out. The public gets a narrative line and a galaxy-sized number. One of the key documents is a page where the allele table, the rows of loci, and the numbers at the locus point is literally covered in black. The table is the DNA profile. It's what experts are supposed to cross-examine. Is there allelic dropout, elevated stutter, borderline peaks near threshold, mixture behavior, or not? Without the allele table and the electropherograms, we can't even ask the right questions, let alone answer them. So right now, match is being presented as a conclusion with no visible work behind it. The state is effectively saying, trust us under our own private thresholds. It matches. Now let's talk about the reference sample, the cheek swab taken from Kohberger himself. It travels through the paperwork under 3 different identities. 1. Item 108, reference oral swabs for Bryan Kohberger. That's the physical buccal swab. Number 2, S108/M20224843 underscore S108.CSV. In the STRmix staff search report, the same reference is now a software object, a file identity used in the modeling. Number 3, known reference sample of Bryan Kohberger in report 26. The language becomes generic, and then the report drops 5.37 times 10 to the 27th power on top of it. That's that octillion number. So you have the physical ID, item 108, the software ID, file name that ends in underscore S108.CSV, and report label, which reads as known reference sample of Bryan Kohberger, with that 5.37 times 10 to the 27th power attached. Here's what makes that more than just nerdy bookkeeping. In a death penalty case, the suspect's DNA reference should never be hiding under a staff search label. That phrase has a specific meaning in quality control. It's for lab employees, not the man on trial. If the lab reused a staff search template for the key STRmix run and never fixed the wording, that's a documentation failure, not just a typo. It forces the defense, and any outside reviewer to reverse engineer that item 108 equals S108 equals known reference sample, instead of the lab saying it plainly. If Kohberger worked there, disclose it. If he didn't, don't call his profile staff search. Now here's the key point, and it's not 3 people, it's this. That 5.37 times 10 to the 27th power statistic appears tied to the staff search STRmix pathway, the S108 pathway. So the fairness question is simple. Where is the clean, explicit crosswalk that says, in one sentence, item 108 produced S108, and S108 is the exact known reference sample used to generate 5.37 times 10 to the 27th power. If the state wants the jury to rely on the number, the state has to show plainly who the known reference is in software terms and how item 108 becomes S108 becomes that number. Renaming it isn't misconduct. Software uses internal IDs all the time. In a case with irreversible stakes, you don't get to skip the mapping. Because without that crosswalk, the fact finder is being asked to accept a huge number without being shown the identity chain of its inputs, the one thing that makes the number meaningful. There's another layer the public almost never hears about, how shaky the underlying data is. In the Idaho materials, you see quantitation sheets where standards failed, requantification, plate and ILS failures, reinjections, and resubmissions. Those aren't cosmetic. Those are instability signals. They mean the profile is being generated under conditions where dropout, noise, and borderline peaks are more likely. That's the signature of low template DNA. There isn't much DNA there, so the system struggles to produce a stable profile. When labs see that kind of behavior, responsible practice is caution. A conservative accredited lab could look at the same runs and say, given the low quantity, failed quality control, and borderline peaks, this is inconclusive. Instead, what happens here is fragile data goes into STRmix. STR generates a massive likelihood ratio tied to S108, and then genetic genealogy becomes part of the investigative story downstream. Whatever went into that IgG step, including any upstream borderline calls, isn't visible in the simple, we got a match narrative. Before we get into the statistic, there's a process question. In forensic work, context matters because context influences what gets prioritized, repeated, and escalated. If the lab was told the sheath was probative and investigators already believed other biological or blood evidence wasn't, the system starts with a story. This item is the key. Rule number 1, probative is not scientific certainty. It's a prioritization label. It can be reasonable, but it must not become a self-fulfilling prophecy. And now look at the timing. Reruns and reinjections completed by 11/18/2022. By 11/20/2022, an email moves toward a memorandum of understanding and genealogy coordination. That's roughly 48 hours from instability signals to escalation. That may be allowed, but it makes documentation more important, not less. Who decided other leads were exhausted? And on what recorded basis? I'm not saying the decision was improper. I'm saying this is exactly when the record needs to show the criteria, the approvals, and what alternatives were ruled out. Rule number 2. IgG escalation is a decision point, not a neutral fact. IgG may start because we need leads, but the fairness question is, what was considered exhausted? By whom? And documented where? Even if the STR supports inclusion, the activity level question, how it got there, when and by what transfer pathway, is separate. Here's the point, and it must be handled with restraint, especially when the run is borderline. Rule number 3. Trace on an item does not automatically equal direct contact. This sequence can create a category error, treating borderline trace as direct contact proof because it fits the story the system already had. I'm not alleging misconduct. I'm saying the standard in a case with irreversible stakes is transparency. Show the decision chain, show the quality control, show the thresholds, and show why other biological evidence was deprioritized before the conclusion hardened. Why this matters in a death case. This isn't nitpicking paperwork. It's about how much trust we're being asked to place in a black box in a potential death penalty case. We're being told, don't worry about the blacked out STR tables. Don't worry about failed runs and reinjections. Don't worry about the reference identity moves from item 108 to S108 to a generic known reference sample underneath the 5.37 times 10 to the 27th power claim. Just accept the math and accept the conclusion. But in forensic science, especially where a human life is on the line, that's backwards. The data and documentation speak first. The conclusion comes last. If the STR data and the quality control records aren't on the table, the word match is just an assertion. And in a capital case, an assertion wrapped in a giant number is nowhere near good enough.